All right, so we're live, not live. Well, we're live, but recording for May 8th, 2020. I'm in kind of a excited vibe for today, just because I'm willing myself to be excited. So I sang for Casey when she joined the call, and now I'm starting a good vibe. So this is build inquiry, and I think, like we tweeted out, the focus of today will be talking about query 10 and/or RFC ratifications. Is that right?
I hope so. I too am excited to ratify some things. I hope.
Let's do it.
Awesome. Yeah. What did you sing, Rico? First question. This is
I said we needed a jingle. We needed build and query.
Agreed. At some point. We'll submit an RFC for jingle development at some point. Cool. I'm going to share a screen really quick. I think, first I'm going to check what screen I'm actually going to share, because I think I have like a million browser tabs open here. But we've been working for a little while on like a bunch of changes, as Rico has been describing it, as query. We're calling it query 10, which is actually query 0.1.10.0. It's not the 10th. We're not on major version 10. We're on minor version 10. But for query 10, we're trying to get to a point where we have a very clear roadmap of what finished will look like. This is a tracking issue to sort of like talk through some of that at the RFC side. And so this is mainly for the planning. Hopefully everyone can still hear me. But this issue is sort of like, I've been using this as kind of a point of reference while working on this project to try and understand like how this might look in this query 10 world. And this is just like the list of query help, right? And so these are showing all of the commands as if all of these RFCs were accepted. And we were in a world where we can sort of understand what things would a user showing up to query CLI from the get-go sort of see. So ideally this is, and this has actually not been updated, because we, at bare minimum, we're now going to talk today about how the drop command will probably go away based on some recent feedback. But the access command is in there. That's new. Apply is new. What else is new in here?
Are you saying that we're going to drop?
We are. We're going to drop squared. I'm into it.
Very sorry about that.
No, it's good. It's good. This humor is welcome. Let's drop right now. Drop. There. Now the pun is fully realized. What else is going on here? But yeah. Anyways, long story short, we have a whopping 8 RFCs that get us to this point where it would be theoretically possible to write the code against this, because we at least have some common consensus around what's going on here. I've been trying to keep this sort of list of the RFCs and their actual sort of like progress up to date. So every now and then I revisit this sort of list. But just to go through the ones that we have actually merged, we've actually merged a new sort of RFC around expose, which will allow people to expose parts of a data set that might be sensitive. We have always written our Starlar code assuming that private data will exist one day. And so that's why all the need for locking keys. And expose gives us a way to say, no, I explicitly would like to show a part of a data set to a transform function, and require the user to slow the user down before they actually give that stuff away. The apply command is a really exciting one. I think we're just going to say it's awesome and it's been merged and it's great, and we have a lot of work to do there. It solves a lot of the concerns around how transforms work, and particularly how they work with working directories. And then the rest of the ones that I think we want to kind of try and grind through today and see if we can get to a point where we can ideally hit the okay, let's do this button, or at least list for as many as we can get through within the hour, stuff that needs to be cleaned up before they can be ratified. And so writing down a list, externalize private keys, moves private keys out of configuration. We think this is a really important detail, and uses the operating system level keyring as a backup for private keys. Configuration overhaul is a tip to tail sort of port and polish of our configuration file. The biggest thing that does is also make our QFS file system configurable. Push pull commands actually is at 3 out of 5, so this is technically accepted. Our conditions for accepting are 2/3 majority of the query core team approving of an RFC for now. In the future, we may revisit how that works, but for now, we could actually just merge push and pull as is, but I'd invite others if they want to sort of comment on the last changes before we submit. as long as it doesn't modify the intent of the RFC. I think that's fine. Delete and drop is, I think, the biggie that we need to talk through. We've had a bunch of conversations around delete and drop. Basically, as proposed, this thing had 2 words appearing at the top level, both being delete and drop, and they were very confusing. And I think we are in a position where we can sort of, ideally, that's the one that will kind of work out a verbal sort of like understanding of how it'll work today. Just before the call, I pushed some changes to the access commands. Access command specifically talks about in query as it exists today, we have the notion of publishing and unpublishing. We want to move away from that model and talk about pushing and pulling data sets. And to that end, we need a method. We need sort of a room to grow when it comes to access. Eventually, we'd like to do access control for collaboration. So we can have users that won't be able to sort of, a user can create a private data set or an encrypted data set and say, I only want Rico to be able to edit it. I would only like Dustin to be able to see it, that kind of stuff. So the access command sets us up for that. And the way it sets us up is by moving the current status, which is like, we have this concept of published and unpublished. It renames them to visible and hidden and moves them into the access command. And then last but not least is the storage RFC. The storage RFC deals with the need to be able to manage specifically the storing of versions of data sets. Data set histories are very different from Git histories in the sense that they can get very large very fast. And so in query, we have the notion of a logbook, which is kept all the time, always, that describes the changes of a data set over time in a sort of light way. And then we have the actual storage of the versions themselves. And the storage command proposes some bare bones minimums for being able to edit and remove versions of data sets that you no longer want, both locally and on other machines. So going through this list, the biggies that I think I want to just start with the access command because I think it's the one that will knock out the quickest. I've made a bunch of sort of updates and changes to that. And then I'd love to just move to a conversation about delete and drop because I think that's the thorniest one. And then we'll see what we get at the other side of that. But in an ideal world, we're moving some of these to, in this call, I would like to move as many of these into the 3 out of 5 approvals as possible. That sound good? Neat. Okay, cool. Let's go to the access command. This one, as initially proposed, it was going to be published and unpublished, moved into a subcommand. I just want to show the actual sort of description of the text. It has now been updated to be query access hidden and query access visible. This is based off a wonderful suggestion from Dustin. So first and foremost, just want to get some like quick reactions to that. I think everybody was on top of that, but are we okay with hidden and visible instead? Let's see, yes, from.
I got the idea from CSS.
Really? That's amazing.
I mean, I do think I kind of put it in my mind, like, yeah.
I think it definitely describes closer to what this specific RFC is addressing. We're not talking about published and unpublished anymore. We're talking about or listed, unlisted, hidden, invisible. Yeah, I like it.
Yeah, me too. I think it's far better. And I was really in this RFC. I was really struggling with it. The best I could come up with after published and unpublished was like it's in this like alternatives section was like listed and unlisted, which was just mutantly bad. I have to open the chat. +1 from Chris. Thank you, Chris. I
mean, like listed is kind of coming from the like YouTube metaphor for like a video, which makes sense in that context. But in the fact that we're wrestling with stateness and stuff, it doesn't really apply as well.
Yeah, and I think that's where, and that's the only other section I added was based on some comments that were submitted like minutes ago by Mr. Ogrog about this comment in particular. I think was interesting. Yeah, we do have to. Asmir had a question here that I think we should talk about, but this question was basically this curiosity about the where part. So like in the past, we've used the old metaphor used query published to a place, and that would say, and that sort of tied together the notion of permissions with remotes. And so I've added a section to the RFC like 2 minutes before joining this call that basically says, no, that is no longer the case. Now permissions are tied to data sets. And so and they are independent of remotes. And so in theory, let me just pull that actual section up so that we have it. I'm going to start working with multiple tabs in a second here, but rich text, please. Thank you. Visible means visible everywhere is this section that I just added 2 seconds ago. Basically, it means that like these are permission bits, and they work closer to the way that like Unix file permission bits work, where if I set a data set's visibility to visible, no matter who gets that data set, it is visible for them. So if it's visible, if I push it to the registry, if I push it to another peer, if another peer downloads it, its status is visible. End of conversation.
I assume that at some point in the future, when we get like ACLs and permissions and as like a full model, you can kind of like scope this, which would solve that problem. But I think even in that future case, like having a global setting is going to make sense for kind of like the default, right? It's like I set something to visible when I'm ready for the world to see it. And if I have that advanced case where I only want a certain organization or whatever, like that'll come in a way where we kind of like, I don't think it's contradictory to this proposal.
Exactly. Yeah, and I think that it would be an access control error for you to have a data set to visible and be like only one, and have a rule in the ACL list that says like only Ramfox can see it. It would be like, that doesn't make a ton of sense. Maybe it doesn't, but I think the more important takeaway here is that if we change this to say that permissions apply to data sets, they do not have anything to do. They're completely decoupled from where they are.
Yeah, I think that makes sense because like in the peer-to-peer sense, it's the only thing that makes sense.
Yeah, it's the only way we can manage the complexity of this, right? Like we've run into this as a problem as a team a whole bunch where we don't, we get really kind of turned around with like, now we need to like make like a grid of like where this data set is published and like whether Steve can see it and Lucille cannot, and you know, it's too much of a mind bend to say, you know, and I think that it's a much more difficult model for a user to manage. And as we said, as we introduce access control, I think this explodes again in complexity. And so instead, what we should just say is access control is defined on the data set, travels with the data set. So in the hypothetical scenario where a registry ends up with a data set that is encrypted and only accessible to somebody that is not the registry, then that's fine. It just means that they don't have any access to the data.
So can you describe what happens when I change the visible field?
Yeah, so if I change the visibility from visible to hidden, and it's already, I'm assuming you mean after it's already been pushed, Chris?
Yes.
Yeah, so like that, the common question of like, okay, I made it visible, I pushed it to the registry, and then I made it invisible, I set it to hidden, and then I pushed again. And this gets back to the like distinction that we need to make more clear with logs. Basically what I've done is I've added to the logbook, and that changes the setting. What I would do is I would push again to the registry. And when that push happens, the registry has to accept the new changes. Currently query does not have a collaboration model. Currently what query does is the author is the only person who is in any real control of a data set. And so the registry would see that that author has set the data set to hidden, and can either say, this is an error, you're trying to push something in hidden and I don't like that, or has to accept it, and sort of goes from there. So in that case, it would not accept any push if it wanted to error. I think it should be fine to like accept it.
That doesn't, but that doesn't impact anyone who's already pulled down, after that. Like when it was visible and then a bunch of people pulled it down, and then if I change it to not visible anymore, they just still have their own copies, but they can't get a new one.
Absolutely. That's absolutely the case. And this is just like a problem with thing, and there's nothing we can do to fix that.
I think that's the only possible way to do it. It's similar to like, I push a video to YouTube, people watch it or download it, and then I turn off like the public visibility. Like people have seen it or gotten copies of it. Like there's nothing you can kind of do to stop that. And yeah.
Or like the president tweets and then or anybody tweets and then they delete said tweet. Like you can't undelete the fact that it's been seen by people, is the thing that we sort of contest with a little bit, I think. But for us, it's really important because we're an offline first application, right? Like we have to be very, like, people have to pull the updates. They have to know that they're choosing to update the latest thing. And that's going to have can sometimes have funny and unintended consequences where like, and I think this happens in Git a lot too, where I'll sometimes pull updates to something and all of a sudden my working directory is completely different because somebody has made changes that I was unaware of, and then I have to get caught up on those changes. Does that make sense? I saw something in chat, but I missed the show chat button. Yeah, and so how are others feeling about this? Right now, as it stands, I'm going to stop sharing really quick, but as it stands, we have one approval on this. Oh, yes, and there's one other issue we should address here before moving forward that actually ties very closely to this. In the RFC as currently written, it says that the registry will not accept hidden data sets, that the registry will error if you try to push a hidden data set to it. The original thinking there that I sort of put forth was very kind of selfish in the name of the registry, just basically like, hey, if you push this as a data set, we want to put it in feeds, and we don't want to have to write the code on the cloud side to have to deal with data sets not showing up in feeds. I don't think it's that big a deal. And Asmir sort of asked this question in review, basically saying, I would love to be able to push a hidden data set to the registry. And what that would do is it would create a URL that exists, but isn't widely disseminated. So if we had like a sitemap functionality, it wouldn't show up on the sitemap. It's not a hidden thing, but it's not private, it's hidden. And it is exactly the case of an unlisted YouTube link. And so I'm tempted to say that that's Asmir laid out some great examples of where, like, if you just want to push a backup of your work in progress, like I think is a common example where you might later sort of like not choose to sort of disseminate that data set widely. I think that's justification enough to say that we should just allow it and change the RFC to say that we don't automatically, but the problem that creates on the other side is now what this RFC currently proposes is when you push the registry, it automatically sets the data set to visible, which doesn't happen right in this context, I guess. I don't know, we have to figure out what happens there.
I think pushing and making it hidden should be an not advanced case, but like non-default. Like I think setting it to public.
Case.
Yeah. I don't know if it requires a pro account, but definitely a thing where like you need to add additional options or configuration or whatever in order to do it. Because the thing people are going to expect most of the time is I push and people can see it.
I think so too, and I'm really into that. If we default to, I would like the default behavior of push to be as close as possible to what currently happens with publish, where it's just like send it to there and be visible on Query Cloud. But I think that the idea of being able to do it with a flag is really a nice compromise. Others agree? Rico, you were nodding on the idea of being able to do this.
I mean, I was acknowledging the usefulness of the functionality of having sort of an unlisted data set and representing the people who complain about, not complain, but request often private data, which I know this isn't, but if it's security through obscurity or one step to that, I mean, I want to be careful about not making sure that we all know that we're not promising encrypted data or truly private data through this feature, but I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, there's an entire universe. There's an ocean of Google Docs that are public on the internet, but nobody knows the Dropbox links.
It's the same as like, Google Docs is a good example, or YouTube again, where if you can push something and then if someone has the link, they can see it. But we should use language to make it clear that it's not private. It's not like only certain accounts can see it or it's encrypted or anything like that. Yeah,
and I've added some language like that specifically to the hidden command. It's like hidden does not make your data set private. It just means that people require the thing. Oh my God, the thumbs up emoji is amazing.
I just remembered I could do that. Yeah.
Whoa, how do you do that?
You want to use the reactions tab at the bottom of Zoom.
Right.
I've used it to vote on things before. Anyway, keep going.
Cool, dope.
Sorry for the distraction.
No, this is delightful. Cool. So I think that covers it. Are we all cool with this? If we are cool with this and the changes mentioned here, then give me a like and subscribe on that RFC. By that I mean go approve that RFC and let's move forward. Sound good? Cool. I think that one's pretty straightforward. I don't think that we have too much contention on that one because it's particularly with the rename to hidden and visible. I feel like it feels really clean and polished to me. Rusty, since you are on the call, but I know you can't speak. Thank you very much for your review on that one. I think I should have incorporated all of your corrections and changes. A lot of it, Rusty actually was great about making sure the RFC document itself presented kind of what was happening in a way that is a little more readable. Cool. Then I think we should move on to delete and drop unless others have any other stuff they want to cover first. Anything? Okay. Then let's get going on this one. Here. Okay, so this one, I think we're not at the highest number of comments. I've been really enjoying tracking the number of comments on this. I mean, all of these, they get really high, and to me, this is like the system actually working, where we're seeing lots and lots of discussion on these RFCs, and the idea that none of this is backed by code just makes me so happy. The drop command and delete command as sort of phrased right now. This basically, I haven't had time to update the language of the RFC itself. So we're kind of stuck in this halfway state where currently the text describes to this basic set of changes. Let's just start at the beginning of what the changes were proposed. That way we can talk about how we want to undo some of those proposals or move around some of those proposals. But we're going to rename storage remove to delete, just to clarify its meaning. Again, we should talk about that today, because I don't know about you guys, but all of a sudden the word remove is starting to kind of grow on me again. I don't know. The next thing we wanted to do is add an amend flag to the save command. This is to match Git, and basically that means that I can type query save -- amend. And what that will do is take the old commit and remove it and create a new one in its place. And then we add a new, and then the initial RFC said add a new top level command name drop. And long story short, we're just not going to do that. But drop was intended to be a sort of a distinction between data sets that you want to get rid of or data sets that we'd like to get rid of on a remote. And I think the best thing to do from here is actually jump to a comment on the PR that Casey put forward that I think really hits the whole thing, hits the whole nail on the head, and to me is what I think we should talk through. So the first concern that Casey sort of is pointing to that was mentioned by Mr. Ogrog, I should actually be saying Ramfox, I apologize. I'm supposed to use internet names when I'm on the internet. Kind of worried about delete and drop being the same thing, and that I think is, and here I'm really excited about what Mr. Ogrog has started proposing, that that is moving more toward the idea of a richer set of commands for manipulating history. In my mind, it's too early to go there. And I'm concerned because we haven't picked a collaboration model yet. And so I don't want to build commands that talk about revising or editing or merging or patching until we really have thought through how collaboration is going to work and the actual use cases that users would like to behave upon. I think that's going to be a lot of research around branching and other tools other than Git that do stuff that is branching under the hood, but doesn't actually expose that to the end user. Lots and lots of work there to do there. So for today, I think it's the point made here though about having two words at the top like delete and drop is really important to kind of cover here. And then there's a lot of ambiguity around what the difference between the two is, and Mr. Ogrog sort of really gets in on the. Is it in this comment? No, it's in a later conversation. We sort of talk about the distinction between things that edit things that edit data set histories versus things that edit data set storage. And that seems to be one of the big contentions, or not contentions, one of the big things that we need to wrestle with in this RFC. And then Dustmob gets at, Dustmob really pointed out there's a lot of FSI stuff that was not covered in this RFC that needs to be sort of brought up. I personally, I point blank accept all of that. It's just complexity that wasn't properly covered by the RFC and just needs to be moved into it. Yes, removing for remote, basically Dustmop gets the idea that we should be using this new remote pattern that we're seeing in a lot of the RFCs. So Casey took all of this, Rand Fox took all of this and proposed, I would sort of sum up what Rand Fox proposed as merging everything into the delete command. and then most importantly, you have this one or, and then everything that has to, and everything that is in the delete command sort of doesn't distinguish between editing history or whatnot. It's mainly about deleting stuff. And instead of having different commands for different use cases, use flags and errors to guide the users toward the right intent. The other thing that is covered is we do need something to deal with storage manipulation and management. And in this proposal, there's the option to sort of just move all storage manipulation into the storage command, which to me sort of gets rid of the central ambiguity of having two top-level commands, one named delete and one named drop. And I think that that's the thing that we should really focus on getting rid of. I think there should only be one. I want to just open the floor to get other sort of like top-level views on some of this. This goes on for a while. We have lots of conversations. There's stuff. People have thoughts. So I'd like to just open the floor up for other people to discuss or bring some, or ask questions. I'm going to stop screen sharing so that we can all see each other.
I actually have a question that I'm not sure if I misunderstood or not reading the RFC. With the proposal we ended up with, if I do, if I you know, I have a data set, some history. If I say delete one revision that edits the history, does that also unpin those blocks but not run GC, or does it not even unpin those blocks?
It unpins blocks and does not run GC.
Okay. So that's pretty similar to what we have currently.
Yeah,
that's exactly the same. Just with
that's what we do currently. Yeah.
Okay.
And for the reasons that you talked about, right? Like, we don't want to actually get rid of space until the user explicitly says like the undo forever stuff, right?
Right. Okay. Sounds good.
It does, to sort of add a little bit of detail to that, it does put you in a situation where if your IPFS repo or your underlying storage is close to max and things are unpinned, then that data is now sort of just floating around and may or may not be.
I think that's reasonable though, because I mean that's what these kind of systems always do, right?
Yeah.
I mean, like with Git, you know, you might have like hashes that don't have branches pointing to them, and then you run a command and randomly Git decides to pack things or GC. It's rare, but I mean, you know, it is kind of the expectation of what happens when you don't have fresh pointers into your heap.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Brent Fox, do you want to sort of like talk through some of the logic because you did a lot of work around thinking about the relationship between like data set histories and storage. Can I cue you to go on a rant on some of this and
Sure.
talk through the delete proposal?
So I phrased it around logbook, messing with logbook versus not messing with logbook. I feel like there's two things that are happening. There's like messing or like changing the canonical view of what this data set is, which to me, my shorthand for that was like messing with logbook, making changes so that when we look at the history of what has happened, you know, it's different versus I just need more space on my machine. I don't want this version anymore, as being a totally different thing. And that delete, feels like delete should be the thing that most people point to be doing things, and dropping stuff should be what you do when you are more advanced or have used query for a bit and you understand that you are not removing the data set, you're removing pieces of storage, freeing up space in your machine. So to me, delete being the thing that most people focus on, felt like we needed to like point people in one direction of like, this is what you should be doing. Also, now that we have this remote pattern, it felt like using the remote flag to talk about, trying to think about like what's natural for when a person is, you know, pulling and trying to manipulate things, as long as we have good like communication. So when you say, you know, delete, and we know that this has been pushed somewhere, it says, hey, in order to, you know, just so you know, this has been pushed to the registry, run this command if you want to delete it from there. Vice versa, you do with the remote command, or with the remote flag, we say, this deleted it from the remote. If you want to delete it locally, run this or something like that. I just having good communication with the user to make sure that they're doing the thing that they want to be doing, I think is important. And then when Dustin mentioned having the ability to restore stuff, I felt like it was important to just keep that in mind with like what each command should be doing, so that we know what we can and cannot restore. So if you delete something locally, your log is still there. If you've only unpinned the things, you can get that stuff back. But if you have a foreign data set that you've deleted, you're removing that log from your logbook. And if you want to restore, you're going to have to pull from some other location. So yeah, so it's interesting. Delete now, if you're doing something for something in your namespace or not, does do like fundamentally different things with the logbook, but it felt like they were logical things, like the way that they handle it, because you're not allowed to edit someone else's logbook. So the only way that we can be sure that we can understand if it's been deleted or not is to remove someone else's logbook totally. But I don't think the user ever has to know anything about logbooks. Like, right, we can just communicate to them what's happening. And if they really want to know, then they can find out. And also the concept probably won't really, until they're looking to be messing with their own storage and dropping things rather than deleting things, they're not going to ever know that there's an option for that until they get to a point where they're advanced enough in the query space to know, like, oh, well, if I want to be messing with my storage, I can remove versions without messing with the history. And yeah, so I think nesting it into the storage command is also good because it just makes it seem more advanced, which it is, and means that if somebody wants to be able to do it, they have to learn more and be more informed. So yeah. Also, I don't have I genuinely have no strong opinion of delete or remove. So whatever people decide is Mecca, I will back them.
Dustin, go ahead.
One last thing about logbook. I think everything you said is like the right way to think about it. And also, you know, we might change how logbook works in the future, and like it shouldn't be a reason to change commands, right? So yeah, logbook is very much like, it's the old, if you do something right, people won't know you did anything at all sort of thing. It's like, it should be transparent and visible and just make things happen in the background.
Yeah, it wasn't until this, I mean, obviously I've always understood the benefit of logbook in certain ways, especially syncing with remotes. Well, yes, that was the context in which I understood why it was like important, but it's cool to find out that helping users locally is another important task that it will have. Like, there's just many different, because we have this canonical thing that we know the accuracy of, and we treat in a really specific way. There's a lot of like cool things we can leverage from it, even if it wasn't the first immediate thing we leveraged out of it. But having a revise or whatever, there was a conversation about that name, whatever that was, it struck me that was pretty cool.
Yeah, I love this mantra that Dustin's been repeating, Dustmop's been repeating, of like, queries should know, and the user shouldn't have to worry about it. Like it's not a bunch, like this like no modes thinking. Like we shouldn't put cognitive burden on the user to know when it's their data set or someone else's data set. We shouldn't put cognitive burden on the user to understand they're editing a logbook or not. The command should yell at you when you're trying to do a thing where the intent doesn't make sense. So if I type query delete me /dataset, it should be like, the only way to delete this is with query delete me dataset -- all. And that sort of explains to you that, oh, you're deleting history, and we get a chance to stop you and slow you down doing the wrong thing. You can still do the right thing. You can still do whatever you want. You just need to learn more. As you said, Casey, that's a really nice Ramfox. That's a really nice. That's my.
That's part of why I brought up the FSI stuff too, because FSI is another level of that where we should make sure that you can delete things if there's no dirtiness in your working directory. But if there is, then we just ask the intention, like, do you want to keep the files or force remove them? Same sort of pattern, just applied in a different scale.
Query should know is the motto that query should never be our public. It should never be our motto. But that would be like dystopian queries. Like
not all know
whatever catchphrase. Just query should know.
Query should know what you teach it. How about that? It shouldn't know anything more than things that you've taught it.
Query should know what to do.
Query should be your friend who only wants to help and doesn't. All
right, get back on track.
Okay, query shouldn't be your friend. No, it should be a program in a computer that runs and syncs stuff in decentralized context. Cool. That actually went. So that is the RFC that I would like to adapt everything to reflect what we've just discussed here and say that should be the RFC we should try to ratify. One command called delete, make that command contextually aware and present the user with specific slowdowns and whatnot. Not aware, contextually.
I'm so sorry.
Feeling pretty tongue-tied. Yeah, no, it's make it good at its designated task, which is not a job because it is not thinking.
Do stuff good.
Do stuff good, yeah. Okay. With that, I can rewrite that to match. I think this also affects the storage RFC, which sort of like, basically I would take everything about query storage drop, take the entire conversation about drop, move it into the storage RFC, and call that a day. And I think that would, because actually that is largely covered. There is the thing that is doubly confusing is there was both query drop proposed and query storage drop proposed. And basically what we're saying is we're dropping the drop and we're keeping query storage drop. But I'll make sure that any text or language in the top level drop is considered and moved into storage drop if it's relevant. But with that, I think revisiting our giant list of stuff, sharing screen again. Hey, it's 2:40. Maybe we can be done early here. We talked about access. That should I would very much appreciate everyone just giving some thumbs up on that. We're sitting at 0 out of 5 on that. Delete and drop we've talked about. Push and pull is set up. The storage command is what we just talked about. I don't think there are any further contentions about the storage command that need to be discussed on call. It is the biggest thing to sort of say about the storage command is it is setting us up for this problem that has been surfaced by push and pull, which is this notion of retention strategies. We talk a little bit about here. It's kind of hard to talk about because retention strategies are a thing that do not yet exist but need to, which is basically runs into this problem where hard drives are a finite size. And yes, this is why Asmir or Arku was not in. But I think we sort of talked more about how this is actually, yes, and we got a thumbs up on this. Cool. And then we did get an approval. Awesome. We've come full circle. The notion of retention strategies is just hard drives have a finite size. If we let everybody just push forever, we will eventually run out of hard drive. And so a retention strategy is what does one do when the amount of space that I'm trying to push to is less than the amount of stuff that I'm trying to push. And the very strange implication of this is if you choose the wrong retention strategy, you're affecting not just the people that you're pushing to, but the health of the entire network. Where if we were to use a retention strategy that just said, as people try to push newer stuff to you, forget the older stuff, then that means that by the sort of like, the result of that is you end up in a situation where, I don't need to be sharing screen for this. You end up in a situation where the whole network forgets earlier commits. And then that's basically the way the internet works right now. Like if you like we have one organization called the Internet Archive that tries to back up the web, and everyone else just sort of does whatever they want. We want a healthy network that remembers, so we need different retention strategies. The storage command is just laying plumbing for that. So query storage drop and query storage info are the only thing proposed there. The more exciting stuff comes later when we propose the idea of garbage collection or the idea of retention strategies for remotes. But we are nowhere near there yet. So the storage command should be relatively straightforward. Moving down the list. So delete and drop, we talked about. Push and pull is approved. Configuration. Does anybody have any questions about configuration? The only major switch there is to multi-addresses. We could talk about file system configuration, but I think it's kind of a pretty in the weeds topic that isn't really relevant for a call. Ryan Fox?
I had questions about it, but you're right. It isn't in the weeds topic that isn't necessarily ready for a call.
I think we can talk. I think I want to keep the focus on the like design side of this. The implementation side is neither here nor there. Well, no, it's definitively there and not here. Yeah, then I think that's kind of it. Other than that, we should be trying to get all of these ratified, and that gets us. And once this is done, we have everything we need. The roadmap for query 0.10.0 is approved, and we will know that it is. We can ship 0.10 when everything in all of these RFCs is done. There's a big list, but at least it's a finite list, which is fun. So with that, it's 12:44. I would love to 2:44 in Eastern time. I'd love to give everybody 10 minutes of their life back, unless we have any pressing issues, business needs to be covered.
I vote to ratify.
Sick. This club is formed. Spread the news on menus nationwide. Have a lovely weekend, and yeah, thanks so much for joining. Our next call will be in a week from Monday, and we will be talking about. We'll just be taking open user calls. So if anybody has any questions they'd like to ask, feel free. From here, the next round of RFCs are going to get really interesting. We got retention strategies, access control, encryption, and collaboration are all the sort of like next. That's going to take us like 18 months to 2 years to sort of like really fully get it done. But that's the stuff that we're set up to talk about after these guys get ratified.
Finally, something interesting.
Awesome. Cool. Well, thank you so much, everybody. Thanks for joining. Thanks for reading. And we'll see you all next week, Monday.